Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Luke from London Tech Leaders here. Hope you're all very well on this Tuesday afternoon. Super excited to bring you guys the fifth WeShape webinar of the year with Marcus Kirsch, all around transformation tactics. So we're going to be discussing how to debunk the out-of-the-box myth as a leader. Marcus has got several years of experience with the digital transformation field, so I can promise you that is a very insightful presentation with lots of user cases, which is always good for leaders to know and take learnings from. But as you guys know, WeShape are the sponsors for this webinar, which means they're going to just give us a little bit of information about what they do. And to do that, Farouz is going to come on and tell us about their capabilities. So yeah, Farouz, please come and tell us everything that WeShape has to offer.
Yep, thank you very much, Luke, for that brilliant introduction. So yeah, guys, my name is Farouz. I work with WeShape. My role within the business, I'm the senior BD lead. So I look after the majority of the sales activities. So I'm here to just give you a little bit more of a rundown into what we do. We are a tech consultancy, and we operate in a hybrid consulting model, delivering end-to-end projects, consultancy projects, as well as time and material team augmentation. The company itself, I mean, we're made up of tech consultants as well as ex-industry technology recruiters like myself. And in terms of capabilities, we do specialize within DevOps, data, cloud, and software engineering, delivering solutions within the UK. As well as our nearshore capabilities, and we also run our own tech academy, which is growing. So yeah, that's to bridge the talent gap and the demand within the market. The way that we do this, guys, is through our events like these webinars here. We also have our London Tech Leaders and a couple of other specialized events when it comes to DevOps and data, as well as being accredited and awarded company. We've received a few awards when it comes to DevOps. That was something that we started in, but we're also partners with some of the biggest cloud vendors such as AWS, GCP, and I believe there's also Microsoft Azure on the way. So yeah, if any of you are on a journey or if you have a roadmap sorted, if you know where you want to be, but you might have here a blocker, if you are, dealing with time constraints or if it's capabilities, we have the expertise and the capabilities to actually come in at any point of that roadmap. Or let's say if you actually have an idea or a business case and you just don't know where to get started, that is something that we can take you from the start of the journey all the way through the implementation as well as the support stage. So yeah, that's a little bit about WeShape, guys. I'll leave my details in the chat. If any of you are interested, feel free to reach out, and I'll be very happy to hear from you. Thank you very much and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Farouz. Fantastic pitch as always, mate. Thanks for joining the webinar today.
Much appreciated. Enjoy, guys.
Fantastic. So now we're going to move on to the main show. So you've all come to see Marcus talk all about his transformation tactics and the things he's learned over the years. Just a bit of housekeeping from me before we start. Any questions you have for Marcus along the way, please add them to the chat. I'll be monitoring that and asking Marcus all the questions at the end. If you wanted to ask your question more anonymously, you'll see the private chat functionality on the engagement bar on the right-hand side. Pop your question in there. I have access to that. No one else will be able to see your question, but I will ask Marcus that at the end also. So now I'm going to bring Marcus onto the stage, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Marcus, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Luke, and thanks, WeShape, for the opportunity to talk, and I hope everyone else who's here, and thank you for making time over your lunch break or something like that as well to listen to my little ramblings. I hope it's going to be insightful for sure. Just to give you a little bit of maybe background on myself. So let me just pull something up here, and I know this looks like a lot, but give a bit of background on myself. So I worked over many years for lots of different companies in a lot of IT areas and a lot of non-IT areas and a lot of industries, from automotive to IT to advertising to learning, healthcare. God, where haven't I been? My original background is in art and design and innovation, and I about 24 years ago did a course here on innovation and behavior, and looked a lot into new ideas around digital technology and what to do and how that works with people. And then ended up over, in particular, the last 10 years, working a lot of change and transformation from innovation, working with companies to look at, how can we actually build teams that can build better products and services? How can we bring change to organizations? How we can build a culture of both creativity and digital effectiveness. As much as I wrote a bit of a book about that 4 years ago. It's called The Wicked Company, because it looks at wicked problems. And I've been running a podcast called The Wicked Podcast, where I talk to industry leaders and people who wrote business books around the same subject matter, and sort of went and for 2 years read a book a week and then talked to the authors and try to figure out how else we can answer all these questions that are out there that often block us for change and transformation, and how to solve this problem a little bit better. So today I want to talk a little bit slightly more focused, not just in general about change and transformation, but a little bit of something that sort of has been popping up for me here and there, which is sort of the out of the box idea of, if we do change and transformation, let's try to use something out of the box, and then it will be easier, a bit cheaper, a bit quicker, a bit better. Or sometimes you call it like a cookie cutter approach. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because I don't quite believe in it. I think I've rarely seen it actually work. And today I want to talk a little bit why I feel that way, and what I think the 3 fallacies are around it that sort of debunk the whole idea that this is actually a thing, and a little bit summarize that at the end to maybe give you some helper notes and insights. In particular, because I know some of you out there that have joined us today are in leadership positions, that, how in particular from a leader perspective, where you often don't quite have the granular transparency, can you a little bit get a better idea of how this works, or if it's working or if it's not working, maybe a bit earlier, or help build better business cases, as much as how would you support your teams and so on, And so I'm trying to a little bit capture that and see and tell you a couple of examples from projects I've really been involved in myself, or that I've been leading on, or that I've been involved in different positions, just to understand that. So let's start a little bit with this out of the box and cookie cutter thing. Yeah. So I think in particular, it felt to me that often it sold to leadership that this out of the box thing is a thing and can work quite well, or well enough. Whereas then the reality of most projects and programs I've been in, this fell apart pretty quickly, roughly 2-3 months. And before you know it, just when things are kicking off, before you know it, reality sort of sets in, and suddenly the out of the box thing just falls over, or the cookie cutter, or sometimes projects are called maybe in a similar way, like the one view or the one thing, that I think is just not appropriate for most organizations, because as you will know, organizations are pretty complex. So forcing one particular way down the road of an organization is often a thing that just doesn't really align with any culture, with any organization, yet it is kept being sold. Just to give you a little bit of an impression, or maybe get you a little bit more into the mindset, let's do a very quick little exercise, just sort of thinking exercise. I usually do those in workshops, and it's quite nice to sort of get a bit more, manifest more of what I mean with some of the differences that are seen between reality and out of the box. And the exercise usually is called How to Make Toast. And usually what you should be taking is a pen and a paper and trying to draw up instructions for your best piece of toast and how to make it. So if you would need to give instructions to someone else about how to do that, how the process works of making your best, just the way you like your toast, how would that work? So just think, I would like you to think just for a minute, or just for a few seconds, to think, how would you do that? Would you draw it? Would you write instructions? How would you maybe go about it? So try to imagine that a little bit, how you would put this together, what it would take, and try to visualize that a little bit in your head. And think, how would you do that? How do you think it's appropriate that someone else would get everything that's needed to exactly follow that and follow those instructions best? So think about it for just about 2 seconds. And I'll show you a little bit of some of the outcomes that I had when I do this exercise, and compare it maybe a little bit with the thoughts you just had right now. So just to show you this, and I hope you can see some of them. Some are a bit small, some are because there's a lot of variety there, and this is the whole point. Whenever I do this exercise, there is, depending who the target audience is, and often it depends on the practice background and the language they have and the cultural background and so on. You get a variety of different things. Some people like to draw, some people like to write bullet point instructions, some people are very simplistic, some people are a bit funny about it. But what you can see is everyone, even so a simple thing like making toast, has a variety of different approaches to. And I think there's a variety of different languages people need to understand and want and need from this, which already sort of debunks the whole out-of-the-box thing, because it's just really, really hard to exactly get it right. And the point is also not necessarily to get it right in one particular way. It's maybe more about finding your particular way, which often doesn't align with what someone else thinks what for them is out of the box. To give you some examples, just in terms of the outcomes and the differences. So, for example, yeah, you have images and text. So, depending how you think, you prefer imagery or text. The length of the journey is quite interesting. I had people who said, well, you know, I'm going to go and buy a loaf of bread and then I slice it. Other people said, I go to the freezer, that's where I have my toast, and I unfreeze one of the slices and put them in a bit longer in the toaster because it's frozen. And then other people sort of stop then when it's warm, they take it off the toast and put some butter on it. Others work on the presentations, like there's a knife and a fork and whatnot. So the scope and how far this goes is often very, very different of what people need to understand where it starts and where it stops. So the whole end-to-end thing can be very different to people and the expectations around it. And obviously from a general mindset, you often have in your business sort of an engineering mindset in some part of the company, and a non-technical or non-engineering mindset in a lot of other areas like sales or creative and so on, or strategy. They're not always thinking the same. So you have that often where they differ between a more quantitative approach versus a more qualitative approach. And that just gives you an idea of how the out-of-the-box thing often is very different for everyone. And the question is therefore, again, less, there is no one out-of-the-box thing. It is always a mixture of it, and sometimes it's a bit finding that. And there's no one entity that will ever offer you that one thing, because there is just no one thing, and it's always up to you as an organization to actually find it. So let's go a little bit more into some examples and some of the, also an example of the out-of-the-box and toast thing that I found. So I was working in one project, and there was about 140,000 people globally, and just a help desk solution that was supposed to be found. And I think they had about, if I remember the number right, about 2,000 people that were in the support, and that were supposed to help the people through the help desk, as much as there was a massive expectation of actually having self-service, which a lot of organizations are trying to get to. And the interesting thing there was the way they argued about was that we're going to teach 2,000 people, those support specialists, a particular language. That's what we're going to use on the help desk. And they're going to know exactly what everything means and all the jargon. And that will help 138,000 people to actually get around the help desk, which is an amazing tech bias towards how this should work. And when I first heard them say that, it was really surprising, because they basically were designing for the 1%. And I found often when I go to organizations that they actually say, oh, we can't design for the 1%, we have to design for everyone. But here in this particular case, because it was from an angle of that help desk out-of-the-box solution, they essentially ignored 138,000 people who are not engineers, who don't know the jargon, but who have to come to the help desk and then figure out what to do and how to get through it. And it was really looking at a very small and narrow aspect of target audience, and leaving out like 90% of the rest of the audience. And I found it fascinating, because the out of the box was completely ill-placed in terms of the language and so on of what was supposed to be happening. So that was sort of the argument. But then what we did was to say, look, why are you actually serving the 2,000 more than 138,000? Isn't that going to cause a lot of friction and problems, whatever? Do you want to maybe shift that mindset? So we did. We had a look, adjusted the language, and just made the whole thing way more accessible for 138,000 to actually go there and within a few seconds know where they need to look, what they need to do, and so on, and improve that, which then relieved a lot the help desk support. And we assume as well that that massively helped with actually training any new support that would come in if we needed one, or when people leave and people come in on such a big scale. It just makes the training simpler because we had a simpler language, a simpler way of going about things, and that made the specialists much easier to train up. So the out of the box sort of never existed there because it's sitting completely in the wrong space. So that's just as an initial example. To give you a bigger example that sort of shows the similar kind of bias on this is out of the box and therefore it sort of should work, is Google Plus, if you remember that, where they had these circles of people, and the circles were sort of all, that's not how people would group people, but because sort of object-oriented in the way databases are structured and data objects function, that's how Google Plus went with. And it was just not fit for reality. So the out-of-the-box approach, or the approach in general, just was not fitting at all. So the tools were shaping more the experience than actual reality was. And that's often sort of, I think, a challenge with some of the out-of-the-box aspects that I've seen, basically. So just to develop it further, I'll make one more point that is not directly sitting in IT. This is architecture designed by an architect called Zaha Hadid, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but it's another example of where the output is massively shaped by the tool itself. So they're using particular 3D software and tools that make all these really round shaped things. And she's known in her design to not have any straight edges in any of the designs. And this is not all because of particular design decisions. It's actually a lot because that's what you can do with the tool set they're having and the 3D programs they're having, and therefore they're exploiting that. So it's sort of the tool shapes the output rather than the people initially. And I think it shows a bit more of how tools can shape the output instead of taking it from reality and then going that way. Let's have a look at these three fallacies, how I call them, that sort of sit there. And if you look at the left here, so the outer box, it's on the left-hand side, which I think is barely existing, was a very small part of what we actually should be looking at. Because again, it falls over very quickly because there's, for me, three other pieces that actually lead then on to the real thing you need, or the real out of the box, or the real kind of core aspect that you should be looking at. And those are the adoption gap, invisible cost, and repattern. Let me just walk you a little bit through those with some examples. So let's start with the adoption gap. So what is this? The adoption gap is essentially your buy-in, your sort of internal market fit that I found that a lot of out-of-the-box systems just don't support. And the second you start bringing the perceived out-of-the-box towards that, it just falls over. Then there's two aspects of this gap that you want to bridge and take care of. So there's one is the perceived one. And the perceived value often seen as, again, so there's often cultural or language-based where, IT talks to the rest of the business and the rest of the business just speaks a different language, has sometimes different targets. And sometimes it's also brand of IT is not quite sitting close enough to the business. So it's this us and them kind of aspect that you want to bridge and you want to invest in. And if you haven't enough, this is where things start to fall over and they start to heavily affect whatever you're trying to achieve and will likely create blockers. So the perceived trust is often that is more psychological and more fear-based on the other side, because that's the general change that happens where people say, well, we use something, we're familiar with it, we want something else. So whatever you bring along our lines doesn't suit us. So I think that, again, already is often a point where our first step, a first reality check, where you will adopt your original out-of-the-box thinking and it will start to shift already. You will just not end up after that conversation with the same thing. So again, it never really exists as an output per se. It's just often it either clashes or it doesn't exist and needs to be already adapted. The actual ones is more like the targets. So that's a discrepancy between the targets of, let's say, the business and IT. And I will talk a little bit more about that on the next two slides. Perceived value, there's an example I have from an organization, not too different to a big networking organization like WPP, who have thousands, I think 2,000 entities, for example. And they're all different, they all have their unique selling point. So in this case, we had the challenge where, you know, IT tried to bring them sort of this cookie cutter or straightforward services and say, look, you're going to be using the same services, they're all going to be the same. Here is what we give you. And this was a massive issue and a massive conversation because all these entities perceive themselves as unique. The way they sell to their clients is through unique process, unique going about in their business, unique offers, and so on. The second they heard that they're all going to get the same service, they were like, we're not doing this. We worked years on establishing our brand, doing things in a particular way, and therefore you cannot suddenly tell us that we all have to do things in the same way. That totally takes the competitive edge out of everything for us. That will impact our clients and customers. So they were incredibly averse to that, and it took quite some conversations and perception into helping them understand that actually what we're giving them is still what they want and need, and that they can use it on a particular flexibility. But that took conversation, and before that there were massive blockers, and it really nearly threw the project. It's really important. So that was the more perceived thing of like, this is how you talk about it, that's not how we talk about it. It's maybe a simple term to do that. So really invest in that. The second part with the actual value is then there is often when you look at the targets. So when you look at the targets, there are things where you say, well, the targets can actually be described in quite a similar way, but when two different departments look at it, they perceive it still differently. To give you one example here, again, when in one project we had that from an IT perspective, we had the typical cost-cutting approach and target there, and cost-cutting for any other department always sounded like, oh, that's going to cut into our growth. Of course, with the cost-cutting, we have simpler tools that cannot give our client what they need. So we're going to lose clients. We can't do that. And that was only because the way it was described, how cost-cutting delivers value in comparison to how the growth targets they had and how would they deliver value, right? So that was not aligned. And I think it's really important to have these targets in a better language or more connected to each other to help across that and help to create this, to really help fix this adoption gap. And again, when you move over that gap, you very quickly have to move into something that is not exactly the original out of the box. You'll have to end up somewhere in between where, yet again, the out of the box just never ends up being the real thing you're implementing. Or worst case scenario, it either gets blocked or later it costs you 3-5 times as much to then adjust it pretty quickly the second you put it live. So what's how to fix that particular one? What I found really helps as sort of a central communication piece is often to create this kind of value tree in your business where people can actually see what aspects contribute to what, and that they also really understand they're actually contributing to the same thing, maybe in different ways, but to the same thing. And that often brings them back together, and it's worth doing workshops around that to really help people to see where they sit and that they're actually pulling on the same string in the same direction. It's really important and very helpful, in particular in the beginning of projects, so that you really get a better idea of the costs and also where the benefits might sit. Let's move on to invisible costs, because I just had a look at the time, so we'll maybe accelerate a little bit, but there is definitely time for questions at the end, because that's why I want to go through this a little bit quicker. So what's the invisible costs? The second you get the buy-in and you come across the adoption gap, then you're going to hit what you're also very familiar with, which is, what people do you have available? And because in the end, the tricky thing will be that if you run your organization halfway decently, then everyone will be busy, everyone have a backlog, and you won't really have people available to do the change. Or how do you tie this together, right? And again, if you originally think like that's out of the box, that's just going to fly, you will see that based on the people available and when and how, it will already change again your scope and how that works. So again, getting buy-in on these levels of once everyone says, yes, we want to do this, yes, we believe in this, we give you time for it. It's like, well, who's going to do it? When and how? And how and which aspects can we start to talk about deprioritize, to reprioritize the change and these changes in the deployment, right? So one of the examples here that showed this a fair bit was a big complex new ecosystem being drawn up, with new the way you check identities and the way you log in and single sign-on and all that stuff on all sort of these good platforms together, which was nicely architected, made a lot of sense. They had all those costs down, but what they didn't have was they didn't talk to people about saying, well, we need to clean up the data because the data of all the resources and everything needs to be in place. The system will only work and bring value if the data is in the right shape. And then they had a lot of people to build the system, but they didn't have accounted for the time and effort it takes to clean up the data and when this can be done. And for some of the entities they had it deployed, they just didn't have the people and the time. And sometimes I've seen another project as well where they had a similar challenge and they had restructured their IT in a more centralized way. So they had pulled IT people away who could have cleaned up the data, but they were now sitting somewhere else. So this initial moving of people actually inhibited that the data could go into the system. And because, a lot of these systems are garbage in, garbage out, because the data wasn't valuable enough or not ready in time, the whole system did not create the value it did in the meantime. So really looking forward on that and then understanding how, therefore, the core system needs to look like and be shaped like based on the people available and who can do what is eternally important. And again, it just so easily and very quickly starts to shift this whole out of the box thing. And before you know it, it looks like something else. It'll do something else. It'll have different requirements and features. And again, out of the box just rarely survives a couple of weeks in that. The other one we had, and again, it really depends on the budget, but this one was seemingly all great on paper, where we were promised we're going to get 80% of particular people's time. And when we actually kicked it off, none of the people were available. I still haven't found out until today, how this really happened and how around 20 to 30 people suddenly disappeared from all sorts of departments and weren't available anymore. But we had to then redo this. So we had to spend another 3 months digging back into all the department leads and just finding new people. And we succeeded quite well, but it was a constant fight. And I think originally we then ended up with like 20% of time from people and then got it back up to 40%, which was just about doable. But again, like looking at that scenario, looking at that risk aspect early on and having a plan B really, really is important. And I think it seems that often you think, oh, it's just, we have this out of box saying we need 20 people, it's fine, we'll find them. There's often not enough de-risking I find on that, which then ends up in reshaping the out of the box way too much. Another example to show how people are available or not available, even when you deploy things, was an interesting project I was in the middle of COVID. So I ended up in one of the healthcare providers during COVID. And what I had there was that the learning department had actually created a brand new way of helping sales to better sell digitally, because they had to move the whole business from very physical way of or real world way of selling to totally digital, because COVID restricted where they could be and meeting people. And they had the whole training plan set up. Everything was there, everything was sent out, they put it live, and then nothing happened. And then they looked at it and they started going and asking the departments and was like, why are you not doing this? And the answer of the department, oddly enough, was, oh, we have to double down in sales because sales has been dropping. So we're trying to sell twice as hard in the old way. We don't even have time to send anyone on training. So even though the training was exactly the right thing and the right investment to do, the incentive wasn't quite there because it was just not in line with the strategy that was there, which then yet again changed the whole way of how to deploy the digital sales and all of that, just because even the training just didn't get picked up. And it was amazing how this was not streamlined. And it was only solved by someone from senior leadership to basically start a whole communication campaign and say, look, this is what you need to be doing. You need to do the training. You drop some days of sales and that'd be fine. And they had to really shift around this. And it was impressive to see how it was not obvious for the sales department to say, oh, that's the help we need. we should better have a look at this to help us in sales. Sometimes these things are not very visible when you're in the middle of things. And what I found therefore is, in terms of fix, and that is, look at the core systems, what you can do, but look at the availability and sort of map a little bit the timings that are available, how you can keep these flexible, how you can back things up and project in advance, not just when you start kicking off, how you need those resources. And I remember I built a whole big Excel sheet on that, sort of predicting the next waves of services we wanted to do in one project, and how we can make sure that the right people are there, because we were really overstretched. It was really hard to find right people, but just to have early flags and know in advance enough of, when do we need to hire people, when do we need to prep people, do we need to do two months in advance or 3 months in advance, just to them when they actually need it, they're actually there. And I've found in a lot of other projects where this was very not projected enough, and therefore things got blocked, and then again scopes changed, and the whole idea of the core system out of the box just fell over really, really quickly. Last but not least, repattern. So the repattern I've found is sort of a thing where, again, the out of the box is sort of, it's one of the biggest missed opportunities when you say, right, we have this thing and it works like that, and this is cheaper and that's more easy, and it's often just seen in a vacuum where this one thing exists and nothing else seems to be considered. And I'm saying this is the biggest opportunity because I found a lot of projects where there are a lot of patterns and similarities sitting in other areas of the business, and they're just not being brought into the same business case to be added to the sort of out of the box and simple thing. And the other thing is also that because none of that sits in a vacuum, the first thing you often have to do is like, oh, we have to connect it to this system and this system, because that brings some benefits, or it needs to do just to actually work. Even so, the core thing's simple, but it needs to sit with the other one. So even there, the out of the box is never quite a thing. It needs to get expanded even before it gets deployed. Otherwise, it often doesn't even function. So there's always this extra work to be done where, again, if you look at it, it's like that little out of the box thing that everyone's been talking about in the beginning of the project is already not there anymore. It's just one small part of the whole. And therefore, it sort of doesn't really exist. It never is really the one thing that ever is the real project. There's way, way more around it. And the repattern, just as an example, and the best example here is like data sharing. You have one system, even if you have a bigger system, the way it needs to connect to all these other pieces and these other patterns in your processes, there's a massive benefit there if data can travel properly, and data can sit and go through one system and go to the other. And also an experience, the way people want to use it and share it wherever they work in departments is often not considered. And whenever I started normally dig a bit into what the project is and who it will affect, there was always a bigger business case there that for some reason the business didn't see, which was a shame, because I think often there would have been more budget available, knowing that it's actually a bigger impact that we're creating if you look outside in other departments. And often that didn't quite come together, and that's a bit of a shame. To give you another example where this was a big, actually, misassumption was where this was for code managing, and the original project was about, can we actually, do we just need to buy GitHub, or do we need to buy Subversion as a tool for the whole global effort in one company? And they were thinking of buying it for millions and millions for thousands of employees. And when we actually looked at it, what turned out was that GitHub was only used in Europe. Subversion was only used in India. There was no overlap in the project and the code. Therefore, no one needed to retrain. We could keep the developers in India just using Subversion. They came out of college, knew Subversion, knew how to use it, kept doing that. And in Europe, they would use GitHub and just work on separate projects with that. And they didn't have to retrain anyone on either. So when we looked at it, you also understood that the context here was that there isn't even that out of the box, or that one product will not actually solve, because you would end up in a scenario where you either have to retrain the whole of India or retrain the whole of Europe. which wasn't even the case. So this was where the out of the box wasn't even the thing. When you looked at the context, it was just even the wrong approach to start with. Similarly, some area over at the NHS, when we talk about patterns, was where it was around identity checks. And the thing there was that that all the services had different identity checks and different suppliers for that. And they all had different quality levels. Some would work better than others. And what they failed to do as well was to actually look across the whole board and say, why don't we use the one that works best, integrate it somewhere else, and actually save a ton of money and a ton of complaints, and our help desk will be less overwhelmed. And they just never did it, because they just looked at this one thing with this one supplier and tried to improve what the supplier was doing, instead of looking at the other areas and just say, hang on a second, we should do this across. And also look at what P&G, for example, has done quite often, to look at which service has the most money, and they can then do the investment to deploy a particular service on a quality level, and then give it for less money or more cheaply to the other services. And this is another thing where, if you just look at the out of the box, it just doesn't exist, because it can sit in other areas and actually solve things there if you adjust it a bit. So again, the initial case just often isn't the right one and never quite stays sitting like that. So that's what I saw in some of those groups of portfolios of services where this doesn't get recognized either. And it's a bit of a shame, because I think it's a big trick to be missed. And I'm going to skip this a little bit, because I'm looking at the time and I think we're a little bit over. So I'm just going to go quickly to the summary and then open this for questions and say, look, from a leadership perspective, even with a straight tech bias, the out of the box just never quite exists. As you can see of some examples I gave you, you look at this for a little bit as a proposition, and before you know it, through the gaps and the people available and anything, this will shift so quickly that you never end up with the out of the box. So that case falls flat 9 out of 10 times at least, as far as I've been seeing it. So as a leader, point these things out, look at and talk to the teams and the directors and say, look, tell me what this gap looks like. Can we cross that gap? Is that relationship built? On the people available, can you really make double sure these people are available? Which may be an easier one. You've probably been across that a bit more, but I also seen it often that in reports and reporting back to leadership, there isn't, it's harder to support, or it doesn't often come across. It's more like, oh, we just deliver that and we're going to do that. But it's rare that that gets checked. And I've often seen where delays have happened because of it, because it's not being part of the reporting. And for teams as well, to remind them to say, look, look at those fallacies, look at, and make your teams available to be able to talk to these stakeholders and say, look, if we talk to these people more and a bit earlier, they're not going to be blockers later, because they will understand what we're trying to achieve. The language will be more aligned. They will be more familiar, and it will be more collaborative approach. And that then doesn't create this us and them thing, and it will not challenge the core services or out-of-the-box things too much. And you might be able to stick close and find the real core aspect you actually want to find. So I'll stop here, because I know I've been overloading you probably a lot. Luke has been asking if anyone has any questions. So please feel free to ask anything. And Luke, if you can help me maybe a little bit of pointing or asking a few out, and I will do my best to maybe answer those in the time we got left.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Tremendous presentation, as always. I hope everyone learned a little bit throughout there. Yeah, so we have Matt who's asked a question, just seeing what's to come on stage. But we've had a couple of questions through the private chat as well. So what I think we'll do, we'll start with the one from the private chat, and then when Matt's ready to come on stage, hopefully he can. And if he doesn't, we'll ask his question anyway. So one of the funny questions was, why don't these enterprise solution companies know what they're doing? Why is it then that neither benefits nor experiences ever hold up? What do you think to that question?
Yeah, I think coming from a more art and design background, but with a lot of tech involved and knowing my own tech, I think, there's sort of a historical aspect to that. IT in particular, or software, had a longer time to sit around the whole tech bias and less look at the human aspect to it and how experiences work and how things are more usable. Obviously we had Apple around for ages, which has done a fairly half-decent job on these kind of user experience and stuff, and how to better build systems that actually work more smoothly, and other companies have done so quite well as well. But I think there's still a long way to go when you look at how, I look at a lot of these platform solutions, and I can see the code and the data objects in the graphic design. Yeah, whereas like that doesn't translate into the language of what a non-engineer looks at and needs to understand how to interact with the system. So there's still design in a way where, but this works, but these are the features you want. And I've rarely seen in bigger IT entities or enterprise solution companies that the people who look at end user needs are actually bringing that in, and that's been tested in a particular way. There's still a very tech bias there, which is more on, oh, those are the features, the more features, the better. Even so, we know that people, for example, if they have a lot of choice and there's too many features in it, just like with apps on your mobile phone, I remember there were statistics where, people have on average, 50 apps, but they only use about 5. So, and that tells you a lot about, how reality looks like and what often companies think a user needs. And I think there's a gap there in that particular thing. And I think that's why some of these experiences are not quite as good and don't integrate with culture enough. They integrate with systems well enough. There's enough standards there. But I think integrating with culture is always a bit of a qualitative gap that a lot of companies are missing. I think that's why they are not as high quality as they should be.
Okay, fantastic. Hopefully that answers your question. So it doesn't seem like we're going to get Matt on the screen, so I'm just going to ask. Oh, actually, he's here, so I'm just going to bring him on stage now.
I was politely waiting my turn.
There we go. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining.
Hi,
Matt, great question. Feel free to read it out or ask it yourself.
Yes, I think it builds slightly on the one you were just asked. I've been sold on this, out of the box been in this for quite some time, and it's been really helpful to listen to you today, Marcus, because it's made me realise I'm not going crazy, and quite easy to think that maybe it's just me. I think the challenge that I have found now and historically is that these transparent, inclusive approaches that you mentioned there are great, and the points you make there you can sell, but the exec level that makes these calls in the first place, they remain, I guess, wanting the magical approach. It sounds great, and there's a magical approach there. We can just take that. And by the time they realise that isn't the way, as you say, a lot of time and money has already been wasted. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there still, and it's their business model to sell these out of the box ideas. How do you recommend engaging with the exec at the appropriate time, before they've made their mind up and that cognitive bias is kicked in? They go, well, yeah, but we can do it this way because such and such a consultancy said we can. How do we get in there and sell the kind of ideas you've been talking about in a way that will engage them and maybe get people to think differently before that time and money's been wasted?
I think it's interesting because, what you're pointing out is similar to, the effect you have when you go into traffic. And, the second you see someone driving, you go like, oh my God, they're driving so badly. And the second you go into the car, you suddenly change your whole behavior. And, and it's the same with going into the office. It seems that when you're outside and you're using some app or something, you go like, why is this not working better? Why is this not quite what it should be? And the second you're in a meeting, everyone goes, yeah, that'd be fine. And all of that. It seems to do a behavioral change there. And interestingly, on my podcast, I was literally talking yesterday to someone, so that's going to be out in a couple of weeks, is a guy called Steve Hearson. He wrote a book, Silver Bullet, and he talks a lot at length about this effect and how to look at it. And I can send that around later.
That'd be interesting.
He does a book launch as well on Thursday. If you look at Silver Bullet here in London, over in Greenwich, I think, worth checking out. And he talked a lot about uncertainty as well. So there's this uncertainty level where you go, right, it's really tricky to bridge that gap as well between this is what we need. We don't quite know how this is going to look like. And here's a solution that looks simple enough that kills enough uncertainty. We go like, you know what? In the absence of any better feel for it, we're going to go with it. And he says this just happens a lot. To bridge that for me, for example, I have a couple of tactics sometimes to bring this across in C-level meetings, but also done that in workshops where sometimes I just went and literally put something in front of them and said, look, use this now to the level where I used Lego at times, where I just came in with a Lego box and said, okay, show me how this works. You know, put the figurines where they stand, how people are using it and what they're doing now. And the second you give people these kind of anchors of reality, suddenly the penny often drops and goes, oh, hang on a second, that sounds great on paper, but how about this and how about that? It's a bit similar to just as we know now, there's a couple of these new AI hardware pieces there that look good, and a lot of people bought it. The second you actually start using it, you realize that they just don't function. They just don't translate. They're really not great experiences or user interfaces. So I think bringing maybe bits and pieces in that really manifest what it is helps a lot, because that gets you well away from the Excel sheets where you go, I can't fully understand how 2 million here or 2 million there represent a different value. So you can do this with sort of physical manifesting things. Or another thing that helped me do that often is do little interviews with people, like stories, like talking heads, and actually go out and say, you know what, this is what people in the warehouse are actually talking about. This is why this doesn't work. So don't listen to me. Just listen to that guy, because this is one of 100 people or 1,000 people who experiences this every day, and this is why this doesn't work. And if you actually see a scenario, you can more think yourself into it, because it just brings reality closer into the boardroom or wherever you are, and really helps. It's all about checking in with reality, and you can have talking heads, you know, build something out of straws. I don't care, but it's amazing. Suddenly you bring that element into it. Everyone can link back to how real world works. It's a bit the same with the, you know, how to make toast. Suddenly you go, oh, okay, there is actually a difference that I didn't think. In my head, it was just this one thing. It was sort of was obvious, wasn't it? But the second you actually get in touch with it, you realize, oh no, it's actually, even simple things are a bit more complex, but this is how they are complex. This is actually a little bit where it can fall over. And I think that always helps.
And it's stepping that up to that exec level, isn't it?
Yeah, it's little, I sometimes call them wicked activities. You just go there, you throw something in, like, you know, like on a pitch, you have a bit of a gimmick or a bit of an emotional connector to it. TED Talks do that a lot with their emotional, personal story, and it works really well. So that's why talking heads work really well. So it's a bit like, some people call it storytelling, and you can do that through different.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like the toast.
Yeah.
I did something with paper airplanes, something similar, where I've got the team to make paper airplanes, and then say, right, we're not. Now you're going to write down how to make it, and that team's going to make it and throw it, and then we'll see who wins the contest. And then everyone realizes, oh, it's not even as I've just folded paper up. It's everyone just interprets it differently. Fold it in half. Is that in half? Is that in half? And it makes people's minds shift. But it's that stepping it out to the execs who are kind of have been sold already that out of the box solution.
And trust me, in my experience, they like that. If you don't completely take the whole thing over, but you know, these little things, they can take 5 to 15 minutes. It's not mad, but they really shift the gears in, like, bringing.
You still let them come to the decision.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just Gantt charts and Excel sheets with numbers on it.
Always pretty PowerPoint, which still was great.
Yeah, I haven't met any C-level yet who wouldn't like these kind of things, just to freshen things up, to wake everyone up on top of it, and just to go like, hang on, so we're actually still all human beings, and we want to actually make this stuff work. I haven't met anyone who wouldn't like that kind of stuff, so it's quite nice to hack things a little bit like that.
I like it. Thank you.
All right.
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question, Matt. Thanks for joining the call. Really appreciate you coming on stage, and you've got a fantastic background.
I don't know. I think Marcus is doing
helmets. Jesus.
Yeah, there we go. Well, thanks, Matt. Appreciate you coming. I hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you.
Cool. I'm just looking. I don't think there are any more questions coming in, Marcus. So I think that's probably a good time to wrap it up. Just once again, massive thank you from us at WeShape and London Tech Leaders for doing this talk today. Some really exciting content and some great user cases that I'm sure a lot of people can take away from. Just a reminder from my perspective, London Tech Leaders is on the 15th of May, all around no code, low code. We're onto a rooftop in Broadgate Circle with a lovely view of the city. So please, if you can get down, please do. We are looking to make it our biggest and best event yet. But yeah, thank you, Marcus. Really appreciate your time. And we'll see you again very soon, I'm sure. Cheers, guys.
It'd be great. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, everyone.